I got a fax from a buddy. He's an executive, vice president of international sales for a multi-billion-dollar corporation. The fax said, "When are you going to do the F80 M3? And I responded back, I said, "I'm sick of BMWs. All the M cars seem to be the same these days." Then he sent me a picture of the upcoming front end of the 3 Series, and I almost vomited in my hat. So what you're gonna get is a montage of the exterior so you can appreciate just how good this car looks from the outside before they go and screw it up.
Because you drove a Hyundai to get here tonight. I drove an $80,000 BMW. That's my name.
I have a ridiculous house in the South Fork. I have every toy you could possibly imagine. And best of all, kids, I am liquid.
My girlfriend Danusha said, "When are you going to get me BMW in white?" And I said, "Well, I can't afford it right now," and she threatened to leave me. So I borrowed this from a viewer. Thank God he gave it to me so I could go to the clubs with her. And the first thing we noticed when we got in here is all of the carbon fiber all over the place, and it looks good. It doesn't look like the bullshit, fake stuck on like vinyl decals. There's tasteful use of it. There's literally no use of piano gloss, black plastic. There's a ton of matte textures. It just looks like a solid, well done BMW interior. This has the red option. So you get these M3 seats that have cutouts in the middle, partially to reduce weight. They feel like a real sports seat, something you could take to the track, super supportive. Unless you were like 300 pounds or you're a bigger person, this is gonna feel like you're getting hugged by a bear. And I like them a lot. I like the tasteful accents all over the interior that make it feel a little bit more special than just a standard 3 Series. Now, just because there's so many classic BMW things in here doesn't mean they didn't do gimmicks, because after all, it's 2019, 2020, we need gimmicks. So when you go to valet park this at Applebee's, there is an M logo that shines on the ground from the side mirror, just so they know who you are. The other thing is the seats. They have an M3 that lights up. So, I think a lot of people think that's cool, but whatever, that's what it is. But that's pretty much the only gimmicks on the inside of this. Even from the exterior proportions, it's things that you can see and you can't see. The use of carbon fiber on the roofline to increase rigidity. The trunk is CFRP, carbon reinforced plastic or resin. It's a composite material. There's aluminum on the hood and on the door skin. So they're trying to reduce weight. There's a whole bunch of technical stuff about this car that makes it special. But the rest of the interior is, again, it's normal BMW stuff. They haven't gone to complete digital gauges here. The gauge cluster is your traditional analog looking speedometer, tachometer, your temperature gauge, and of course your fuel gauge, and there's just small screens at the bottom to augment that for your driving modes. It is so tastefully done. I'm gonna miss this when it's gone to all digital. Now, since this has the dual clutch option, you can still get a manual in this car. All the drive mode selectors are right next to the stick, which is great because it makes it stupid simple to choose your engine setting, your damper setting, your steering setting, and your traction control all right here. You don't have to go hunting for it, or you don't have to deal with it in the touchscreen. But other than that, I think the best thing to do is head into the shop and talk about all the technical aspects of this car.
Well, Mark, I brought you another BMW. This is a 2018 BMW M3 F80 Competition.
You know what I brought?
What, Mark?
Well, because I'm probably going to fall asleep halfway through this thing.
I know you have a real passion for BMWs.
Yeah, you have an addiction to them. I swear to God, I'm like, hey, why don't you bring some BMWs? The next thing I know, it's like I got to line down the block all these things. And the strange part is I had the predecessor to this car. I owned one, the E92 M3, which kind of started all these videos, the first BMW I did. And one of the reasons I got that is because when I drove this for the first time, the very first model year, I'm like, what happened to this car? It was so sterile. So I think as Jack starts to explain the history and the development of this car, it starts to make sense why it has this feeling that it does. And there's some pros and cons, which we're going to discuss in great detail.
So as you said, this is one of the most polarizing M3s they ever built. It's the first one with forced induction. It has a lot more electronic nannies. It definitely feels digital or over-engineered, but they did that for a reason. When Biermann designed this car, mind you, Biermann worked on the E30, the granddaddy to all these, E36, E46, where he was involved with a race program, E92, and from what I understand, he led this project largely. He wanted to build a race car for the street. I know that's super overused and he's the king of marketing, but that's what his goal was. He wanted to have the raw emotion of pounding around a race car that you could then take to work. He wanted something reliable, far more reliable than the E92, specifically on the track. He wanted something more efficient.
Basically, every way you can improve the previous generation M3 and all its deficiencies have been improved here on every single engineering and technical level possible. And I guess we'll get to the drive, we'll talk about if that worked or not. So what's going on in the front end?
So this is on the Clar architecture. It is a strut front, multi-link rear. It is aluminum everywhere. It is an aluminum skid plate. It is far more rigid than the previous car as well. And it has all new brakes.
Yeah.
Brembos.
And that's a big upgrade from the E92 because you had that giant single piston front caliper that was just garbage. So the braking's basically the entire front end has been improved.
Yeah.
And then of course, talk about the cooling.
There are 7 heat exchangers on this car. Cooling was an issue on the E92. And when you add 2 turbos to an engine, that problem is only going to get worse. So you have 2 intercoolers. You have a dedicated oil cooler. You have a trans cooler if you get the DCT, which this car unfortunately has. And they've also added a magnesium oil pan. This whole car, what Biermann wanted is he wanted to shave weight out of the M3. Every generation from the E30, the car got heavier. This is the first one that they made lighter. It's 180 pounds lighter than your E92.
Okay. Well, all those weight-saving things do add up. It does also have 2 pickups in the oil pan for oiling. So there was a lot of thought to making this more durable. But let's take a look at the back half of the car and the middle part of the car, and we'll talk more about some of these changes.
Well, we've made it to the back of the M3.
Yeah.
How does this look when compared to your E92?
Aside from this aftermarket exhaust, there's a few things you definitely notice from the E90, E92 rear end. The subframe is different, although it is still a steel piece. The lower control arms are very, very similar, including their pickup points. The upper arm, the lower control arm, houses the spring and the damper the exact same way, but your rear toe link is now an aluminum piece where it was a stamped steel piece that was carried over from all the 3 Series, but they actually upgraded all these, well, they upgraded this arm specifically. So yes, the pickup points are different, the subframe carrier is different, and it's also partly because they decided to hard mount it to the body of the car for rigidity, which they could do because the body structure of this car is far more rigid than the E90 series was.
It is approximately twice as rigid as an E30 race car that Biermann designed.
Which, how old is that car though?
Like 30 years ago. But
They're-
still,
well,
I mean,
right.
yeah.
He was making a comparison by saying they had all this high strength steel they used in tubing on the car for its roll cage and all that. And this car was literally just as rigid as a full-blown race car from like 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's how much body structures advance over time. And there's been a very steep increase in the technology that's being used in these types of cars. So it's neat to hear that. Great example.
The other thing to note, Mark, is this DCT trans. You could get a dual clutch in later year E92 M3s. However, this dual clutch comes right out of the M5 we drove.
Oh, interesting.
It has different tuning. This is the F10 M5 gearbox. It has different tuning, different software, but the physical unit is identical.
Okay.
And it goes into this M differential, which is a electronic diff that can either go, be entirely open when you're not on throttle cornering, or when you start to apply throttle, it can lock all the way up to 100%.
And one of the things that they wanted to do with this differential, and this is, a lot of cars don't have this flexibility. If you have a straight mechanical differential, you can't do these tricks. So they use steering wheel angle sensors, they use G-force sensors, they use speed sensors, and basically the car's programming is that where you can go into a corner. If you're kind of half throttle, it knows not to go full lock. But if you go into a corner, it detects G-force and this huge steering wheel angle, it knows you want to drift and it will lock the differential so you can slide the car around. So they were aware of the type of things that people would be doing with this, and they were fully prepared, and they designed all of this to do it. And it's very cool to see that level of thought, and that's why BMW has kind of always been that type of car, you know, that driver's car, that thing that makes it more engaging to drive at the limit. The other thing they did is they added a hollow single-piece carbon fiber drive shaft here, which you really can't see, and it's covered up for good reason. You don't want to have that damage to that, because I'm sure it's probably like $4,000 to replace it. But is there anything else that we're missing? I know they made some changes during the mid-cycle refresh for this car.
So this is a competition car, a competition package car. So the complaint they had with this car when it first came out was the EPS. It was a very controversial decision because the E92 steering, well, I know you and I disagree on that car, the E92's M3 steering was phenomenal. It really was.
Well, and it was hydraulic as well, which every time you got it heated up on track, the reservoir would blow power steering fluid all over everything too. But,
minor details.
Yeah.
But when this car came out, journalists ripped it a new one, basically. They said the steering was dead, the variable modes didn't do anything, they just made it artificially heavy, and they were right. When this car first came out, the steering was horrendous. That's probably not fair, but it just wasn't very good.
Right.
As the years progressed, I think with the second mid-cycle refresh and with the competition package, they changed the way the steering was tuned to add a little more feel and make it more direct. It's not perfect, but in this day and age, really, no EPS is going to give you a ton of feedback through the wheel. This is about as good as you're going to get it.
Well, and electronically, as cars have evolved, when you get all these different drive modes connected to everything, like we were talking about with the differential, you can't really incorporate all electronics into a hydraulic unit. Yes, you can have steering wheel angles, sensors and all that, but the EPS allows them for far more programmability of how that steering box works, and it is much better for saving weight in packaging now. The packaging is much easier to get in there, to stuff other things in, to reduce weight. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why they do it. I just think that people, that press of that generation, they expected hydraulic power steering feel, and they're totally different systems. You can't recreate that type of feel, and I think there's been that transition now. And it's not indicative of this car, it's indicative of all cars, and I think because BMW is always pushing kind of the engineering boundaries of what's new, what they can do next, they're the first to get kicked in the nuts every time they come out with something. And then you look back, you're like, it really wasn't that bad. It was just kind of different. And while I'm not the biggest BMW fanboy, I can appreciate all the engineering that went into this to try to make it better. But again, it's something that, looking at it objectively, is good. And that's what we're doing in the shop. That's what our purpose is of talking about this stuff. But let's take a look under the hood.
Would you look at all that carbon fiber remark?
I remember when I saw this for the first time, when this car came out, I was at the auto show and I asked one of the BMW reps, and that was before I was doing this. I'm like, is that really necessary? He's like, well, the dry carbon autoclaving process has been shown to save at least, he just went into this ridiculous explanation of why they were using a carbon fiber strut tower brace. I'm like, just say it's a gratuitous use of carbon fiber. It's completely unnecessary and cool. You know, it really is cool. It's like a pancake. I'd love to see how much that costs to replace, though.
Probably more than your house.
Probably more than I'm worth.
As I mentioned below, it has 2 turbos. It is the 3rd generation, according to Albert Biermann, of M-Power BMW twin turbos. It was on the X5M, then it was on the M5 and M6, and then it made it onto this car.
And this is the competition.
Yes, so it makes like 25 more horsepower. I believe this has 450 horsepower, where the base model has around 425.
This is right around the start of where they started to use that competition nameplate, which is typical indicative of just getting more horsepower and some other stuff.
It's indicative of winning, Mark.
Oh, yeah. So you're going to win. That's why they have now an X3 competition, because you need an SUV that's going to win.
I always win when I'm on the school run. No, so what's cool about this car is he wanted a naturally aspirated feeling turbocharged engine. It's not. It makes all its torque down low, and it makes 40% more torque than the S65, the V8 car. It does not feel naturally aspirated, but it does rev. This car revs to 7,500 RPM. Or
I think that's probably what
thereabout.
he meant, is that you can ring it out and still not have that dip in like overall horsepower. It still winds out and it's peaky at the top end and still making horsepower.
In his words, he wanted the emotion of a naturally aspirated car. And to be fair, it does make power basically all the way to redline, and it makes a bucket load of power.
Okay.
It feels a lot faster than 450 horsepower leads you to believe.
Okay.
The DCT in this car, just like it felt in the F10 M5, feels like it's out of a supercar. This transmission is phenomenal.
Yeah, it is. It's a very different direction that they took compared to the E90, E92, and I think this is a massive evolution. We talk about this every time we have an M car, that now that we've looked at the past and we've moved into the present, it's just unbelievable how much they've been able to do here. And the key thing that Bierman talked about is improving overall reliability. And that is something that BMW is probably, it's either you think of they're great performance kind of machines or they're horribly unreliable pieces of shit.
Yeah, there are two camps of thought. For
Yeah,
that, yeah.
so this is the car, this is the generation where they were really trying to turn that around, make them more durable, have better longevity, try to break with that. And that was also something that I was able to talk about with the Toyota engineers when they brought up the Supra. They said, look, BMW had made a turnaround point. They made a conscious decision internally to make changes to quality, the way they built things, to think about a little bit longer term. And this generation so far, at least, well, this is the kind of like the mid-cycle part. So far, it's been pretty good, right?
Yeah, this engine, because he focused on durability, it needed to be bomb-proof. That was his goal for this car. So he addressed all the cooling, he addressed the internals for this car, he made sure the turbos were properly cooled. That's why he went to a mechanical water pump versus an electric one that you got in the previous generations. He made sure the internals were lightweight and forged. It has no liners.
That's a closed deck.
It's also a closed deck. It is a very stout engine. People, by just changing the turbos, not that I recommend you do this, are getting 900 horsepower to this car and running 9-second quarter miles. And they're not blowing up the bottom end. It is a very stout power plant.
So this is kind of the precursor to all the new generation M cars and BMW products that are coming out. And it's kind of exciting, but as good as this car is now mechanically, it has some deficiencies that everything is good on paper. So let's take this for a drive and address some of the things that it doesn't do so well. We're in the business mobile. We're in the Patagonia. We're in the Midwestern tuxedo for the day. Yeah, you better believe it. I had, I'm sorry, but we got to get this done in under 5 minutes. I got mergers to do.
So this is an interesting car, and per usual, I probably like this BMW a little more than you do, but tell me what you think about the M3 as a whole.
All right, okay, so I'm going to bring up something that we don't typically talk about, and that is the psychology behind these types of cars. And we had a great discussion about this yesterday. The BMW, and specifically this car, the way it was designed, is very type A. It's very type A, it's very technical, very engineering focused, and in a way, it has this level of being so sterile that you don't feel a whole lot. There's not a whole lot of drama. And then when you add on the fact that this is also now more reliable, it appeals to a very specific demographic who appreciates this type of design of car.
The emotional connection you get when driving this car comes from the fact that it does everything competently, not that it's exciting.
And you made something, you told me yesterday in the shop, you're like, they went about designing fun mathematically with this. It has a very, very
Germanic.
Yes, a Germanic approach to what they feel fun is. And, you had a chance to talk with Yuri and Jacob about this. And
so when they were doing the new X3M whatever, the new M3 engine is in that car, and when Jacob and Yuri were talking to the lead engineer, they went, is this thing going to be like a Hellcat, the new car? And the engineer who worked on the X3M had no idea what a Hellcat was. He's like, what's that? So they explained it to him. It's a 700 horsepower rear wheel drive car that does not put traction down. And he did not understand how that could be fun. He had no comprehension in why someone would want a ridiculous rear wheel drive, non-efficient automobile, particularly in a sports car. And that's the sensation you get from this vehicle. Everything about this car objectively is near perfect. It rides well. The engine is extremely powerful, is alarmingly fast. The steering is very direct. I mean, the brakes are great. There's nothing I can technically fault this car for.
Yeah, and when I first got in this, it was at Road America. I got on in the M3 competition, and I got in the launch car when it came out, the M3, and it was one of the reasons why I didn't buy it. And I bought the E92 M3 is because I literally felt zero connection to this car. Now this is different. This is the competition. Now, of course, the owner has an exhaust on it, so it makes a bit of a difference, as you can hear.
But I still don't think it sounds good. I think there's this lack of emotion that comes from this car. It's not that I don't like it. It just doesn't excite me the way a more flawed automobile would.
Yeah, and that's what I started to talk about, the psychology the psychology of sports car ownership. It depends on the type of person you are, where you're going to gravitate towards a specific vehicle. And the M cars, to me, as I've gotten older, as I've owned it, to me, I guess, yes, you can drive this every day. You can, like the owner does. He literally drives this every day, makes the most out of it, and he tracks it. For me, I want a sports car that is literally more of a weekend toy, that I look back at it, and I'm like, that is fucking cool. And I look at this, and it looks like every single other BMW forever. And it just, I just have no emotional response to it, regardless of if it's great or not.
If you're type A and you just want a car that goes really fast, does the daily commute near perfectly for what it is, given its ride compromises, and you don't really care about how you reach the speeds, you just want to be able to reach those speeds, this car is perfect for that. The engine itself, which is this high revving, which it does, it revs to 7,600 RPM, is so efficient in the way it delivers power, it kind of saps the fun out of it. On the street, though, it is really alarmingly fast, as I'm about to demonstrate. And this DCT is phenomenal.
It's really impressive. I mean, I don't want to downplay the fact that this is an incredible car. I'm just trying to cover the other part of it by saying, you know, why doesn't this connect to everybody? If it's the perfect car, why don't people love BMWs? Like, you know,
it's trying to be all things to all people, and then where it really starts to fault, I think, is when you take this to the track. It is the same problem the M2 has.
Yeah, you would chase the tail end around a lot in this car, and you can feel it just on the road. I mean, there's literally just all it does is move around. But that's also, I mean, you can consider that fun. I know you like to go sideways, and to me, this is exactly why I don't like this, is there's very little, yeah, I mean, with all the technical, all the engineering, there's very little precision about the way that this car makes power. It has all this torque, it has just this insane amount of boost that comes on, that if you're trying to be smooth, you can't be. It's like you have to be just breathing on that throttle, and even that, like that mid corner, you just do it wrong, it's gonna go sideways. And to me, I spend more time chasing a car like this than maximizing the performance. And I feel like that's a lot of modern M cars, and that's why they're gonna be going all-wheel drive on all the new ones, of course, because then you don't have to deal with that as much. But I don't know, I feel like this is an amazing car with these deficiencies that are only going to trigger people like me that want more theater, they want more drama, they want more feeling something that's more special that's not here.
I mean, I agree with you. The engine, while great on the street, getting past the fact that it sounds terrible, the way it delivers power, again, it's just like an engineer's wet dream. Maximum torque and maximum horsepower. It's not progressive. Mid-corner at 1,000, even 1,500, 2,000 RPM, if you stab the gas, it's going to step out.
Yeah, it wants to walk on you the entire time. And I think when you're going to put the E92 M3 back to back with this, the previous generation and that, the good thing about a naturally aspirated motor is that power is more linear and the torque isn't insane. You have to wind it out. So when you want to drive it more smoothly, you're not constantly fighting the car and the way that the torque is delivered. And that's why I like those naturally aspirated motors from the past as a driver's car more than this. This will annihilate that car in any type of straight line. It has such a big wow factor, but it's when you really try to wring it out to that 8, 9, 10 tenths, when you want to drive it more precise, that this becomes a very frustrating driving experience.
You're not wrong. The E92, you connect with that car emotionally. The steering is, it may not be as precise, but you get feedback. The chassis speaks to you, quite frankly, droves more than this does. But objectively, this is a better car.
It is. Objectively, it's better in every single way except the minor details, and on an emotional level, the engine is lacking something there. But this is the modern world of turbocharged, forced induction cars that are starting to take over. And it makes you appreciate the older cars even more, but it also makes you appreciate just how far we've come and how much power is in everything now. And that's a good time to talk about the final thoughts of this in the shop. Final thoughts on the F80 M3. 2019 marks the last model year of this generation. A big thanks to the owner who supplied me this car for the video. And I have to say something that's self-critical. I tend to try to look at the good and the bad, and often, like in the case of this car, I downplayed so many of the great things about it that you would almost believe that this car's a piece of shit. And that's really not the case. This is one of the best modern sports cars, and granted, I hate to say it's a sports car, but it really is. It's crazy fast. It's got one of the best automated manual transmissions on the market today. It has a manual transmission option. You can truly buy a manual transmission option that doesn't suck. And it handles well, it's set up well, it's got 4 doors, it's comfortable, it's usable, and supposedly this is one of the more reliable M3s. And since I own the E92, and one of the reasons why I sold my M3 was it was in the shop for like 3 months. And that's a big problem I have with BMW products. And if they're starting to turn the corner mechanically, where you're not going to have to deal with some of that, as somebody right now, I'm looking for a replacement for my daily driver because it got destroyed. I'm going through cars like this Genesis, this G80, GSFs, and after driving the M3, I think there's really nothing better out there anymore. That's a 4-door car that gives you performance that's totally usable every day. And in that regard, it is amazing. It really is probably the best car in the market in this segment for all the reasons I said. Now, there's some other things BMW's done recently. Now, Apple CarPlay is free. It's no longer a subscription service, which was a huge ding on these cars. They're updating the infotainment, this latest generation of iDrive. They've updated it several times now to get rid of plenty of the bugs that they've introduced themselves. And it seems to me the overall consensus of getting in all of these new M cars is yes, they're sterile. Yes, they're somewhat bland, they're removed, they're super fast, but you don't feel anything. But that's every car. That's almost every single modern sporty car on the market now, because the mass majority of the public does not want to feel anything. And you're in a quandary if you're a manufacturer. Do you build a car for the enthusiast that wants to feel every little niggle and bump through the steering wheel, or harsh suspension and all of that for that less than 1%? The straight answer is no, because the people that are buying these cars are oftentimes over 50 years old, or if they're younger, they're a lot more well off. And I think that's where the reality check comes in. As this car stands, it's one of the best things they've done in modern history. And that's it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next video.